handful of cameras, I've got a helmet, and best of all, I've got 2 rows of Corvettes right over there and a racetrack. What can that mean? Well, you know what that means. We're going to take the Corvette on the racetrack, but this is a very special episode because that first row, that's a Stingray that's modified with all the Chevy Go Fast parts, and the second row, those are just regular stock Corvettes you could buy at the dealer. So let's find out which one is more track worthy, and that is coming up right now in the Fast Lane car. So here's a comparison. Chevy is basically trying to sell Z06 parts to people who've bought.
All right, a little preview before we head out there. I'm going to call out the shift points as we're going around the track, so we'll make sure that the rev matching is on as we pull out onto the track.
Yeah, so they're trying to sell Z06 Go Fast parts to guys who bought the Z51 Stingray. Basically this car.
We've reached into a parts bin from Z06, the big brother.
Yes.
And we've used those parts and float them down to address areas like powertrain cooling. If you want to run a Z51 out on the track on a hot 100-degree day, the first thing you need to do is get a lot of air into the engine compartment. And the Z51 actually fits the Z06 grill. The Z06 grill flows 17% more air through, and that drops coolant temperatures dramatically. And then behind that, we have the Z06 cooling fan. That's a 600-watt cooling fan that plug and plays.
The tires are Michelin Pilot Super Sports.
On both?
On both, yes sir.
So same tires?
Same tires that come stock on a Z51.
All right, so the difference is the suspension parts, the brakes.
Yes sir, correct. Suspension parts,
Yep.
the brakes, still brakes off the Z06. We have a sub-hardened cooling system. There's an additional radiator that's also added where it picks up the return water coming from the oil filter.
Our engineering team came up with even a better idea. Once the water comes out of the radiator, it goes through an oil cooler. That oil cooler, when the water gets through out of the oil cooler, it increases the water temperatures quite a bit. So what they're doing is they're running it through an auxiliary water cooler. This radiator mounts between the grill and the standard radiator, and it by itself drops the water temps another 15 degrees and oil temps 15 degrees as well.
So we're probably doing about 5/10 of this.
Back down the hood before we turn to the left.
Of this Corvette's ability right now.
Turn 6 here.
Brought the back end around.
Really have to feel the transition. You'll be able to compare that to the modified cars here in a moment.
What you see in here in yellow is actually our T1 suspension package that was developed for an SCCA class called Touring 1. And it's a combination of lower control arms with stiffer bushings in them. These bushings range from 20 to 500% stiffer, depending on which bushing it is.
Rattle your teeth out on the road, I
Yeah,
bet.
yeah. This is totally track tuned.
Yeah.
And speaking of track tuned, our dampers for this are passive dampers, and those dampers were tuned for racing slicks as well as production tires as well to get better body control and turns.
There we go. 100 miles an hour.
Slow the car down. And then do your downshift with the clutch up before we turn.
Yes, these are actually the flow downs as well from the Z06. These are big 6-piston calipers on 370 millimeter rotors.
Yeah, they look massive. I mean, look at that. Good God. Holy cow. I guess when you're flying down the straightaway at over 100 miles an hour and you want to slow the car down for the turn, you need something like that.
A lot of racers like to drop the mass of their vehicle. Z06 has got some pretty exotic parts. And right here you can see a carbon fiber underbody brace.
Yep.
And as well as a carbon fiber torque tube. That torque tube by itself, which connects the transmission and the engine together.
In a perfect world, I would love to be out on the track by myself, and I would love to have Justin Wilson behind the wheel of both cars, or former race car driver.
Radio check. Just give me a wave if you can hear me, please. You got me all right? You got me there? All right, thank you.
I would love to have him behind the wheel because he could really bring this car out to its fullest. But you're stuck with me, so let's see how this car does with the Go Fast performance parts.
And a lot of times too, you can end up with a lot stiffer parts in carbon fiber. These parts here are stiffer and they're 17% lighter than the aluminum parts they replace.
Now, can you mix and match these parts? Can you go to a local Chevy dealership and say, I just want, the radiator, but I don't want the carbon fiber tube?
Yeah, and that's exactly the idea here. You can kind of, like the video games when you're a youth, where you can kind of work your way up. You can start at the front, drop temperatures, increase handling, or drop mass, and mix and match as you go forward.
So the brakes are definitely better, a lot more progressive. They bite a lot more. Let's see the suspension. It's definitely stiffer. Oh yeah.
Stay left. Looking right.
On the track, it's just a much more controlled car.
So in the rear of the car, the suspension, the T1 kit's back here as well. Again, the control arms with the stiffer bushings. And I didn't mention in the front, but we have stiffer front and rear stabilizer bars. These increase the roll stiffness by 40% in the front and 20% in the rear. And this is really balanced for not only production tires, but also race tires. When a lot of racers will go with a wider front tire, the balance of the car is now more tuned to that.
Now, in case you guys don't recall, the difference between the Z06 and the Stingray is basically, obviously, a different engine. So you've got a supercharged engine with a lot more horsepower, but also, if I recall, the Z06 is a little bit wider, right? So
correct.
So that the track is wider, so that you can't obviously replicate in a Stingray.
Correct, but the Z06 has got the same suspension points.
Yeah.
But you're right. It packages a wider tire and overall body width is wider.
Differences are subtle, but you certainly have much more control of the oversteer.
Right back over here where we got the cars from. Once we come to a stop here, folks, let's leave about 3 to 5 feet in between the cars. And then once we come to a stop, let's go ahead and roll those windows down, leave the cars in gear, pull up on the parking brake to apply it. There we go. Yeah, try to leave that spacing in between each other there, folks. And then we'll shut the cars down and we'll hop on out.
Yeah, I mean, it's subtle. It's much more controllable oversteer, much more progressive brake feel. I think if you're going to track these cars, then you certainly would want that advantage. You certainly want that. They said it's a second difference between the performance parts on this track and the non-performance parts.
The whole Stingray packages, all of them are very intense track cars, so much so that the transmissions have an auxiliary pump inside of them that run the transmission fluid out into an auxiliary cooler. And the lines that you see here are running to the cooler, which is mounted up into the rear quarter panel, and then air is ducted down on top of the quarter panel and through that radiator. What we're offering is the Z06 parts, again, flow down. Not only a higher performance pump in the transmission, but also a larger radiator that has 65% more flow area, as well as the ducts that are on top of the rear quarter panels. They actually reach up into the airstream and pull down 25% more airflow.
Yeah, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with the Corvette, the manual transmission in this one is back here. It's not,
yes,
for better
correct.
weight distribution,
Yep.
in case you're wondering why there's a transmission at the back of the car, not at the front of the car. Again. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the differences are subtle. There's much more controllable oversteer, much more progressive braking. It just feels like the car is more track ready. There is a lot of performance in this car to begin with, and this is the little advantage that you might want if you were actually thinking about tracking this car, because all of a sudden it goes from being more road biased to being more track biased. It's also stiffer, it's also firmer, and it's probably going to beat you up a little bit on the road.
This is the duct. Now you can see how it reaches up into the airstream and actually pulls the air down into the radiator. And then that air goes through the radiator, and then you look in the rear, there's vents in the back where the air exits the vehicle. So we did a lot of development, and what we do is we reach in and we look at all the different splitters and spoilers and what makes the best balance for a car. The package that we have here is actually the ground effect splitter and rockers, and then on top of that we have the Z06 rear spoiler with a stage 3 adjustable wicker bell. And that gives like 300 pounds of downforce at 150 miles an hour. And it's well balanced so that you don't get all that downforce on the back or the front.
Now, let me ask you, if you were to get all these parts, how much, do you have pricing, how much would it cost somebody if they wanted to, you know, kind of upgrade their car to more of a Z06 spec?
Well, the parts are, right now we're in the process of pricing some of those, so I can't give you an overall package price, but anything from $2,800 for the suspension kit to $1,500 for the aero package and things of that nature.
And I've talked to some Z06 owners, and they said there's some cooling issues with the Z06. Have you noticed that, or have you addressed that?
Well, interesting thing, if somebody's going to run a Z06 10/10 like this out on the track with like a Ron Fellows driving and slicks, etc., one of the things, some of these parts actually help as well. That auxiliary water cooler that we have up front works on a Z06 and can drop the water temps by 25 degrees as well.
So it's something you could also add to a Z06.
Correct.
This is the car you're going to race, then these are probably the parts you want, because according to these guys, this car with the performance parts is about a second faster on this track in the hands of a professional driver than that car. And you add some Michelin slicks to it, 4 seconds faster. And you need these performance parts, according to Chevy, to add those Michelin slicks. As always, this is Roman reporting for the Fastlane Car. Check out tflcar.com for more news, views, and of course, real-world track reviews. See you next time. Ciao. By the way, click on me if you want to see more 2016 real-world reviews, because we got them coming fast and furious. Yeah, I'm a little amped up after being in a race prep Corvette Z51 Stingray. Baby, out.
You saw it first on the Fastlane Car.
Do you find that a lot of your owners are tracking these cars? Is this a common thing?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of cool when you look at the Corvette has such a strong lineage from racing all the way down to customers buying these cars and racing them. These cars in customers' hands have won 11 national championships in amateur racing.
So it's a car that's not just show but also go.
That's right.
I like this. I like this vent here that channels air right onto the
Right.
You know, very big brakes. Is that something that's standard on the car? Or is that something?
Yeah, no, this is a Z51 part that's originally here, but on the front of the car we do have a larger brake duct that comes from the Z06 and that flows down as well.